protect my privacy, I have kept my name anonymous. Not sure how to begin my story, but I'll do it with the best I can. I guess I'll start by informing you about Blue's Clues show. For those of you who have never watched it, Blue's Clues is a show for young children that was created in 1996 and lasted for 10 years, with a total of 6 seasons and 142 episodes. The show involves Steve or Joe looking for the clues and solving mysteries with help for the audience. Blue was the animated dog that labeled the clues with their paw prints. Blue's Clues was a hit with many little kids, including me. The idea was original and the artwork was amazing. However, Steve Burns was the backbone of the show. Steve Burns was the actor who played Steve. He was more serious than Barney the dinosaur, but he loved kids and knew how to make them happy. There was just something magical about this enthusiasm that made me want to watch more and more of these episodes. The saddest part of my childhood was when Steve left the show in 2002, pursuing a musical career. Steve was replaced by Donovan Patton, who was the actor of Joe, but it wasn't the same. Stopped watching Blue's Clues after Steve West. It just lost its magic. Joe was nothing like Steve. He was a total goofball, and my mother told that Donovan Patton was acting too hard. When I turned 16, my family moved to a large three-story house in New York that was previously owned by a nice old lady. A few weeks moving in, I decided to do some exploring in the attic. I found an old trunk. To my surprise, it was filled with a bunch of old VHS tapes. All of them were Blue's Clues tapes. I knew the lady's cell phone number, so I decided to call her about the tapes. She told me that she bought them from a collector a few years back from her little grandson to watch. After I thanked her and hung up, I emptied the trunk and checked the tapes. All of them had the episodes I already watched, except for one. The one tape had a regular sticker, not a factory sticker like the other tapes had. The title on the sticker was called Blue's Clues Sorrow. I thought the title of this was a little strange, but I figured it was just a copy of Steve Goes to College episode where Steve goes off to college and Joe takes his place. Because Steve said goodbye to all of his friends in that episode, I considered it to be very sorrowful indeed. When my parents went on their anniversary trip and left me in charge of the house, I figured it was the perfect opportunity to check out the tapes. Our TV has a VCR, and I had to admit, I felt like a tingle of excitement when I placed the tape in the player. I was relieved to my childhood memories of watching Blue's Clues. I didn't care with that I was too old to watch it. I knew I knew for sure I would enjoy it. At least that's what I thought. The episode starts off completely normal. The Blue's Clues book opened up and Steve looked out the window of his yellow house. "Hi there, it's me, Steve. Have you seen Blue? Wait, she's not here. Well, come on in." The front door opened and Steve was in the living room looking concerned. "I need to tell you something important. Blue's at the pet hospital and she's having an operation on her. I hope she's okay." Steve stopped talking and looked down at the floor. The scene ended. The next scene showed Steve at the pet hospital. He sat in the waiting room without making a sound. He did nothing but stare at the doors and led him to the operating rooms. The surgeon opened a door, but she wasn't an animation. She was a real person. She whispered in Steve's ears, but I couldn't hear everything she said. "Her heart stopped beating. We tried our best. We couldn't get it to beat again. I'm sorry." The scene ended. The next scene started with the title card saying that it meant the paths after Blue's funeral. A deep voice speaking, "There are 5 stages of grieving process: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance." The voice said, "Steve will experience 3 stages all at once: depression, anger, and mental illness." Steve was at his bedroom, lying in his bed, began to cry, and the colors of the episode turned black and white. It was a depressing old photograph. He cried so hard his breathing grew shallow. The scene ended. The next scene showed Steve sitting up on his bed. He stopped crying, but his face was red and his teeth were clenched tightly. His hands were stuffed with his in his hand. He had his stuffed anteater, Horace. He screamed, "Blue!" on the top of his lungs. His scream sent chills down my spine. Steve ripped off Horace's head, and black ooze squirted out of the animal's stuffed neck. Steve threw Horace in a fit of rage. When the anteater landed, the ooze completely covered the floor. I urged to vomit against my any better judgment. I kept decided watching. Steve's body began to turn a darker and darker color by the second. About 5 seconds, Steve turned completely black out of his bed and walked out of the bedroom and walked into the living room. I thought he was going to sit in the big red thinking chair, but he didn't. He stood in front of the chair and stared at his screen for a full minute. His eyes lost their pupils and became nothing but more than white dots. He started crying again, and white tears streamed down his face. Some sad piano music began to play. The music was so heartbreaking I shed a few tears myself. The message flashed across the screen. The scene ended. The next scene showed Steve still standing in the living room. He had no longer crying. His body was completely normal color. "I can't live without Blue," he said. "She was my best friend. She gave my life happiness and meaning. Without her, I have nothing to live for." The kids in the background that helped Steve find the clues that started to cry and whimper. They shouted, "Please, don't do it, Steve. We love you. We're your friends too." "I'm sorry," Steve said. "I'm sorry if I break your hearts for doing this, but I have no choice. Goodbye." He held up a container. The camera zoomed in on the label, which said, "Potassium cyanide." Steve had a calm look on his face. He swallowed the contents of the container and instantly collapsed. He foamed at the mouth, and his body twitched and thrashed on the floor like he was being electrocuted. He eventually stopped moving, and I knew that he was deceased. The episode finally ended as the TV cuts to static. I still dazed. It took my brain for a few minutes to comprehend what I just watched. I made the decision to play detective and find out where in the world this episode came from. I looked up in the episode online, but nothing came up. I knew the company Viacom owned Blue's Clues, but because their company was named on the show factory sticker of the other VHS tapes. Bit of research, I wrote a letter to Viacom headquarters about the experience and asked them why the tape came from. 2 weeks later, I got a reply from the mail.